The smell hit Do-yeon first. That was the thing nobody told you about livestock processing facilities. Even the alien ones smelled the same. Ammonia, something hot and copper-sweet beneath it, and underneath all of that, the particular staleness of recycled air that had been breathed too many times by too many frightened creatures. He'd worked enough rescue ops in enough quadrants to know that smell. He hated that he knew it. He crouched in the vent shaft, waiting for Sedim's signal, and tried not to think about how his left knee was screaming. He'd twisted it during the drop insertion 3 days ago, and hadn't said anything because Sedim would have pulled him from the op, and he wasn't getting pulled from this one. Not from Chola 9, not from a human farm. The signal came. 2 taps against the duct wall, then 1. Go. He moved. The Vrethkai facility was enormous, a converted atmospheric processor that the invaders had retrofitted over the 18 months since they'd taken Chola 9. The planet itself had been agricultural, a mid-rim world that grew protein crops and kept a population of about 60,000 humans who mostly wanted to be left alone to tend their fields and complain about moisture readings. The Vrethkai had arrived in 17 ships and taken the whole thing in 4 days. Not because they were particularly clever, but because nobody had been watching. That was the embarrassing part, honestly. The Interstellar Coalition had not been watching. Do-hyun had been watching. For 8 months he'd been filing reports, submitting requests, flagging irregularities in Chola 9's communication patterns. He'd been watching from the cramped observation post on Choya 9's moon, eating reconstituted grain packets and arguing with the Coalition's automated response system, which kept classifying his alerts as inconclusive. He had a lot of feelings about that. He was saving them for later. Right now he had a vent cover to remove without making noise. He worked the screws loose with a modified tool that was technically civilian contraband, a magnetic detacher meant for ship maintenance, not field ops. His gear was a collection of improvised solutions. The Coalition hadn't approved this mission. He and Sarum were here with a stolen cargo freighter, 2 sidearms, enough ration packs for a week, and a very optimistic plan. The vent cover came free. He caught it before it could clang. Below him, the processing floor stretched out in the dim orange light the Vrethkai preferred. He could see the holding pens from here, long rows of them, separated by barriers of humming blue force field that smelled faintly of ozone. Humans were in them. Dozens. Maybe more than that, further back where the light got worse. He'd known they were here. He'd filed 7 reports saying they were here. Seeing it was still different from knowing it. He let himself have exactly 4 seconds of pure, cold fury. Then he put it somewhere useful and started moving. Her name, she'd told them when they arrived, was Chaewon. She'd said it flatly, like she was daring them to mispronounce it, and the Vrethkai guard had made an attempt that was so bad she'd actually laughed despite herself. Then she'd stopped laughing because laughing was not something you wanted to do around a Vrethkai guard, who interpreted displays of teeth as challenge behavior. She'd learned that in the first week. In the 8 weeks since, Chaewon had learned a great many things about the Vrethkai. She'd learned that they operated in 6-hour cycles rather than 24-hour ones, which meant the facility had 4 shift changes a day, and the quietest period was during what she privately called the second dead shift, roughly the hours between what would have been 0200 and 0500 by Chola 9's clock. She'd learned that the eastern ventilation stack had a pressure irregularity that caused the lights in pen row 7 to flicker every 40 minutes, and that the guards assigned to row 7 hated this and complained about it loudly to each other in a dialect of Vrethkai that was slightly different from the one the supervisors used. She'd learned that the force field barriers required a proximity key carried by the shift supervisors, and that the supervisors always paused to do something with their communications implant when they passed pen 4, which was where old Jung-soo kept having what appeared to be cardiac episodes, but which Chaewon had eventually realized were deliberate. He was faking them to observe the supervisor's response patterns. Jung-soo was 73 years old and had spent most of his life growing soybeans. He was also, it turned out, the most methodical intelligence analyst in the pen. "They're coming tonight," he said very quietly, without looking at her. Chaewon had been doing a series of stretches that she'd invented to keep herself from going completely out of her mind. She paused mid-lunge. "What do you mean they're coming?" "Couldn't tell you how I know." He was still looking at the far wall. 40 years ago, I did 2 years of mandatory service, and then I went back to farming, and I never looked back. But I know that feeling. Something's about to happen." She straightened up. That's not intelligence. That's your joints telling you it's going to rain. Maybe. He finally glanced at her. There was something calm in his face that she found both reassuring and deeply unsettling. But I'd be ready, if I were you. She'd thought about that conversation every 20 minutes for the next 6 hours. So when the lights in row 7 flickered at what should have been 0300 and then kept flickering, and then went out entirely, and she heard a sound from the ventilation shaft above her that was not a Vrethkai sound, too hesitant, too soft, making exactly the kind of controlled, careful movement that a large predatory alien would not bother making, she was already awake and she was already standing. A man dropped from the shaft into the narrow service corridor beyond the barrier. A human man. Dark eyes, dust on his jacket, something wrong with the way he was favoring his left leg. He looked directly at her and held a finger to his lips. She almost said something very rude, because she'd been held in an alien livestock facility for 2 months, and this was apparently the rescue, and he looked like he'd assembled himself from spare parts. She swallowed it. She pressed forward to the barrier, keeping her voice below a whisper. "How many of you are there?" He seemed to appreciate that she'd skipped straight to logistics. 2. My partner's at the central power relay right now. We have about 6 minutes before the shift rotation. When the barrier drops, you'll have 40 seconds to move everyone from rows 5 through 9 toward the north service exit. Can you do that? I've been telling them to be ready for a week. Something shifted in his expression. You knew? I knew someone should be coming. That's not the same thing. She studied him. Your leg. He glanced down involuntarily. It's fine. It's not. You're going to need to be able to run. I'm aware of, there's a Vrethkai supervisor who does rounds on a 7-minute cycle through the North Corridor. Not 6. 7. I've been counting for 2 months. She watched him absorb this. Your partner needs an extra minute. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he touched something at his collar. Sarum, extend the window. 7 minutes, not 6. I'll explain later. A pause. He looked back at her. My name is Do-hyun. Do-hyun Kwak. I was a coalition observer. Chaewon Park. She paused. You filed reports, didn't you? It wasn't a question. His expression confirmed it anyway. A brief spasm of something that was either guilt or exhaustion or both. The system classified them inconclusive. I know. We had emergency beacons in the agricultural office. We could see when signals were being logged. She'd spent a lot of time being angry about that. Right now, it seemed less important than the next 6.5 minutes. When this is done and everyone is out, I have a lot to say about the Coalition's automated response protocols. Get in line. The power relay smelled like burned insulation and old metal, and Sarum was becoming extremely familiar with both. Sarum Beck had a particular talent for electronic system infiltration that had made her very employable in a number of careers, most of them legitimate, and she had used all of it to trace the Vrethkai power architecture in this facility from nothing but intercepted maintenance signals and one very blurry scan from a passing freight drone. The relay room was exactly where she'd calculated it would be. The layout was almost exactly as she'd expected. Almost. There was a secondary lockout system she hadn't known about, a Vrethkai design, proprietary, using a biorhythmic key rather than a code. She'd found it 3 minutes ago and spent 90 seconds thinking very hard words at it. She was now trying to spoof the biorhythmic reader with a length of copper alloy wire, a biosim patch meant for medical monitoring, and genuine creative desperation. Extending window, Do-hyun said in her earpiece. 7 minutes, not 6. How do you know it's 7? Someone told me. Someone told Do-hyun there isn't supposed to be someone. She's been counting the guard cycles for 2 months. Sedum stopped what she was doing. Focus. I am focused. I'm also noting that you sound like someone who just found out his field intelligence was wrong and is taking it suspiciously well. She resumed work on the biorhythmic reader. What's her name? There was a pause. Chaewon. That's a nice name. Sedum. Working. The biosim patch made contact. The reader hummed. She held completely still, not breathing, listening to the sound the system made as it evaluated the signal. It was a sound like being judged by something that had no interest in being kind. Then it clicked. The power relay opened. "I have it," she said, and let out a breath that had been waiting an embarrassingly long time. "Ready? On your mark?" 2 minutes. She found the barrier circuits and started working. Outside the relay room, somewhere in the orange-lit maze of the facility, 60-something humans were about to get their first chance to run in 2 months. She hoped their legs still worked. She hoped her legs still worked. She'd been crouched in an awkward position for too long, and her right foot was developing that particular pre-pins and needles buzz. She thought about what Do-hyun's voice had sounded like saying Chaewon. She filed it for later. The barriers dropped. Chaewon moved before the hum had fully died, turning to the people behind her, some standing, some just struggling upright, and said, quietly but clearly, "North exit, now. Jung-soo goes first, he knows the way." She'd walked every corner of these pens in her head for 8 weeks. She'd described the layout to everyone, the turns, the distances, because having a map in your mind was the only sovereignty available to you when everything else had been taken. They moved. Some of them were unsteady. A young man named Bumsuk had been here since before her, and his right hand trembled constantly now. She stayed close to him, a hand between his shoulder blades, steadying. Do-hyun was ahead of them, moving with that careful, uneven gait that meant his knee was worse than he was admitting. She noted it and filed it away and did not say anything, because they were moving and this was not the moment. The north corridor was empty. 7-minute cycle, she'd counted correctly. She'd counted it so many times that she knew it the way she knew her own heartbeat. The service exit was a maintenance hatch at grade level, sealed from outside. It opened inward, and on the other side was cold air and darkness and the smell of Choyanine's soil. Still there, still real, still the same damp loam smell she'd grown up with, that she'd been afraid she'd forgotten. She hadn't. She stepped through and her boots touched the ground, and she stood there for exactly 1 breath, just to feel it. Then there were more people coming through the hatch, and she started moving them toward the tree line. The cargo freighter was a legitimately terrible ship. Chaewon had been aboard enough vessels to have opinions, and her opinion of this one was that it had been old when it was new, and that it had not improved with age. The navigation console had a crack in its screen that someone had covered with adhesive tape. The corridor to the cargo hold smelled like engine coolant and whatever the previous owners had been transporting, which she suspected had been livestock of the non-human variety. The bunk she'd been assigned had a mattress with the density and comfort of a slightly soft floor. She slept for 11 hours and woke up feeling nearly human. There were 63 survivors. 2 people had not made it through the facility's 8 weeks. She knew their names and would carry them, and that was all she would let herself think about that for now. The others filled the cargo hold in various states of exhaustion and stunned relief. Someone had found ration packs. Old Jung-soo had somehow located a deck of playing cards and had started a game that currently involved 8 people and appeared to have rules that he was improvising as he went. She found Do-hyun in the navigation bay, standing in front of the cracked console, not sitting because, she could see now, his knee was so swollen that bending it hurt. He had a mug of something that smelled like inadequate coffee. She stood in the doorway. "You need to sit down." "I've been sitting for 3 days." "You've been moving on a bad knee for 3 days, which is different." She came in and sat on the edge of the co-pilot seat. He looked at her sideways. "Give me your leg." I'm fine." "You're compensating on the right side, which means your lower back is also going to give you problems in about 12 hours. Sit down and give me your leg." He sat down. Slowly, clearly reluctantly, like a man who had decided that pride was a luxury he could not currently afford. She repositioned herself and got her hands on his knee through his trousers, hot, swollen, the joint trackable beneath the fabric. She began working her fingers around it with slow, even pressure. Not therapeutic massage exactly, just mapping the damage, warming the tissue. Her grandmother had done this for her when she was small and had sprained her ankle falling out of a grain tree. Do-hyun was very still. "Where did you learn that?" "My grandmother." She found the worst of the swelling, worked around it carefully. "She used to say that bodies keep their own records. You just have to learn to read them." "She sounds practical." "She was from Chola 9, a pause. So was I. 3rd generation." She didn't say the rest of it, about the fields she didn't know if she'd find intact, the house that was either standing or not, the neighbors she didn't have a count on yet. The freighter's communication system had managed a partial data burst to a Coalition relay station, the signal that had finally, belatedly, gotten the Coalition to respond, now that 63 humans and a stolen freighter were already doing the thing the Coalition should have done months ago. She had feelings about that too. The relay station acknowledged, Do-yeon said quietly. They're sending a response fleet. They'll be at Chola 9 in about 30 hours. 30 hours. I know. She kept working on his knee. Outside the viewport, stars moved slowly past. The particular meditative progression of moderate speed travel. No drama. Just the universe being vast and mostly quiet. She'd spent 8 weeks in orange-lit artificial space, and she had missed stars more than she'd realized. You filed 11 reports, she said. He paused. You said 7 before. I said you filed 7 before I arrived. I arrived on week 3. You filed 4 more after. She glanced up. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. We had access to the automated acknowledgement logs. I read them all. I memorized them, actually. The dates, the coordinates you flagged, the classification codes. She returned her attention to his knee. Inconclusive, insufficient evidence, not within current observation mandate. A pause. You kept filing anyway. I was going to keep filing until someone paid attention or I ran out of forms. You ran out of forms. I stole the freighter instead. She almost smiled. She wasn't quite ready to smile yet, but the shape of it was there. I noticed. He was quiet for a moment. The ship made its small mechanical sounds around them. Coolant hum, the faint vibration of the drive system, something in the galley that clicked every few minutes in a way she'd already catalogued as harmless. I thought about it constantly, he said finally, filing the reports and knowing they were going nowhere, watching the surface scans and knowing what they showed. I kept thinking, someone is down there, people are down there, and I'm here writing forms. You were doing what you were supposed to do. What I was supposed to do didn't work. And stealing a freighter did. She moved her hands to his ankle, working the tension out of the joint above it. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not criticizing the stealing. I'm specifically grateful for the stealing. I'm just saying, you did the right things first. You tried the right way first. That matters, even when it doesn't feel like it does. He looked at her for a long moment. You're very calm for someone who spent 8 weeks in an alien livestock facility. I'm not calm, I'm functional. She released his ankle. There's a difference. Calm is a permanent state. Functional is something you decide every hour. A pause. Ask me again in 3 months. I might be screaming by then. He laughed. It was abrupt, genuine, a little startled out of him. It changed his whole face. I might be screaming before then. The Coalition debriefing alone is going to take. I want to be there for that. The debriefing? The part where you tell them exactly how their automated classification system functioned for 8 months while 63 people were held in an alien processing facility. She met his eyes. I'll bring the dates. You memorized the dates. I had a lot of time. He was looking at her in a way that she noticed and chose not to examine immediately. Later, she thought. There was space for later. There was a whole future that hadn't existed 2 days ago, and she was still getting used to the weight of it. Get some sleep, she said, standing. Both of us should. The console's been running on autopilot for 6 hours. It can manage 4 more. She moved toward the doorway, then stopped. Do-yeon. He looked up. Thank you. For not stopping. He held her gaze. I wasn't going to stop. She believed him. She went to sleep. The Coalition fleet arrived at Chola 9:31 hours after the acknowledged signal. 17 vessels, more than the Vrethkai had used to take the planet, which felt pointed and too late in equal measure. The Vrethkai on the surface surrendered in 6 hours. Their orbital assets had already withdrawn when the fleet appeared, a calculus of risk that Chaewon found both predictable and infuriating. The whole galaxy watched. That was the other thing. The story had moved fast. 63 humans extracted by 2 civilians in a stolen freighter, months of ignored Coalition warnings, a farm world held under alien occupation while bureaucratic systems classified the evidence inconclusive. The Interstellar Coalition's communications department was having a spectacularly bad week. There were hearings being convened in at least 4 systems. The automated classification protocol for planetary observations had been suspended pending review. The story spread in the way stories about human stubbornness and alien underestimation always spread, with a kind of gleeful horror, a collective galaxy-wide intake of breath that translated roughly as, "We forgot again, didn't we?" Several Vrethkai diplomats made statements characterizing the occupation as a resource management initiative. This went badly for them. Chewan's farm was intact, damaged. The processing structures the Vrethkai had built were still there, would need to be demolished, but her house was standing, and her fields, though untended, were not beyond recovery. Jung-Soo found his fields in similar condition, and spent the first afternoon just walking his property lines in the early evening light, and she'd watched him from a distance and not intruded. She was doing her own version of the same thing. Do-hyun found her at the edge of her south field, where the grain crop had gone to seed and bent in the evening wind in long, slow ripples that she'd watched from this exact spot every year of her life. The light here in the late day had a quality she'd never been able to adequately describe. Amber, but with green underneath it from the particular spectrum of Choya-9's sun, and it caught in the seed heads and made everything look like it was thinking. He stood beside her. His knee was better. The coalition's medical team had been thorough. He stood straight now, and she noticed that he was quiet in a way that was comfortable rather than absent, not trying to fill the space, just present in it. "There's a debrief tomorrow morning," he said. "Coalition oversight. They want both of us." "I know. I got the same message." She watched the grain move. "Did they specify what time?" 0800. "Then we have tonight," she paused. "I'm going to start taking the Eastern processing structure down tomorrow afternoon, after the debrief. I have a demolition permit already. I applied from the ship." A pause. "I may have submitted the application while we were still in Vrethkai space." She heard the smile in his voice. "You applied for a demolition permit from inside the active operational zone. I had Saram's tablet and I was ready to be done. Saram is going to—" He stopped. "She's already going to tease me about this for years. She doesn't need more material." Chewan finally looked at him. He was watching her with that same expression she hadn't quite let herself examine on the ship. Open, careful, a little uncertain in a way that she found unexpectedly endearing. He had, she thought, a very honest face. Not naively honest, just not trying to be otherwise. "She already knows, doesn't she?" Chewan said. "Saram knows everything before I do. It's a consistent problem." "What does she think she knows?" He was quiet for a moment. In the field, the grain kept moving. The sky overhead was going from amber to a deeper orange red, Choya-9's long dusk beginning. She'd missed this. She'd missed it so much that watching it now felt like something healing, slow and warm, and also a little like it hurt. "That I haven't stopped thinking about you since I dropped through that vent shaft," he said simply. She considered that for a moment. It was an honest thing to say. It deserved an honest answer. "I memorized your reports," she said, "all 11 of them. Before I met you, I already knew how you thought, the things you noticed, the way you kept adjusting your confidence intervals when the data was ambiguous, instead of just calling it conclusive to close the ticket." A pause. "You have a very methodical mind. That might be the most unusual compliment I've ever received. It's the truest one I have right now." She looked back at the field. "Give me some time. This planet has a lot of work ahead of it. So does the coalition hearing. So do I." She felt him listening. "But I think I'd like to keep knowing you, Do-hyun Kwak. If that's something you want, that's something I want." The sun finished setting. The last orange light went out of the grain, and it became silver in the early dark, still moving, still whispering against itself. Somewhere in the distance, a night creature started its call, one of Chola-9's own, native, present through all of it. They stood in the dark at the edge of the field and didn't say anything for a while, and that was enough. That was, actually, exactly enough. The coalition hearing lasted 3 days. It was as satisfying as advertised. The automated classification protocol was permanently retired. 3 oversight positions were restructured. A new rapid response framework for civilian distress signals was given emergency approval and named, somewhat awkwardly, after the Choya-9 incident. a designation that made Do-hyun uncomfortable and that Sedum found endlessly amusing. Sedum herself went back to her various semi-legitimate careers with a story she'd tell for the rest of her life and a standing invitation to Choya 9, which she used twice in the first year alone. The Vrethkai, as a civilization, spent the next decade in a complicated renegotiation of their interstellar standing. Nobody forgot. The galaxy had very good memory for certain kinds of miscalculation. Jungsu planted his south field early that season and got the best soybean yield he'd had in 15 years. He attributed this to the Vrethkai processing runoff having accidentally improved his soil's nitrogen content, which he mentioned at every opportunity. Chaewon took down the eastern processing structure herself, mostly. It took 4 days. On the second afternoon, Do-hyun showed up with a second demolition tool and no explanation. And they didn't talk much because the work was loud and physical and required concentration. And at the end of the day, they were both covered in dust and structural debris, and they sat on the rubble and ate reconstituted ration packs because neither of them had thought to bring anything else, which made her laugh in a way that surprised her with its ease. Her knee had healed. His had too. Cholanine's grain came in gold and thick that harvest, the kind of season that made you think the land was making a point. She thought it probably was.